Join us in the Bear Den, a real-life, real-love podcast celebrating the joys and challenges of parenting, family dynamics, and unconditional love.
Okay, welcome to another episode of the Bear Den podcast. Today, I'm very lucky to have a very special guest in the chair with me. He is was a realtor within here, Utah. Several years ago, he transitioned and became the founder of the men's group that I'm a part of, We Are the They. He has his own podcast with over 500 episodes, The Jimmy Rex Show. It is Mr. Jimmy Rex. Thanks for coming in, mate.
Of course, man. I love it. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, such an honor to have you here. I want to dive into who you are, who Jimmy Rex is. I know there's a lot of people in Utah that know of you. They've listened to your podcasts. But for those in my world that don't know who you are and they just see you as the founder of We Are the They and the guy that makes us jump off cliffs and run with the bulls and all the excessive fun stuff, I want to get into who Jimmy Rex is. So tell me a bit about who you are, where you grew up, what your childhood was like.
Yeah, it's actually a fun way to do a podcast, I think, because it's this weird thing where people only know you from when they met you. Mm-hmm. So there's this versions of me that from all different times of my life, right? Yeah. And I forget sometimes. And it's funny, like I love running into people that knew me in certain times that I forget about, like my mid to late 20s when I was trying to figure out like life and real estate and just finances were a mess. The markets were collapsing. And I remember I was throwing a bunch of parties at my house and we just had so much fun, but they were so innocent and like beautiful, but it's a time that I don't really remember. I don't have many photos of it for some reason, but I was at the water park last year. This is totally not the question you asked. You're gonna have to re-ask it. I don't remember, and I was hanging out with this girl there. It was for my client event and this kid came up from that time and he's like, let me tell you some stories about Jimmy. And he starts telling these stories and I'm laughing. It was like, telling the stories about me, but I forgot all these different things. But it like hit me as like there's entire versions of ourselves that nobody even knows. And it's kind of an interesting idea, you know?
Do you bury those versions of yourselves?
Not at all,
with the
no.
progression you've made in life, like the coaching you've gone through, the changes you've made? Do you kind of siphon those off and push them down? Like, I don't want to be that guy.
No, not at all. In fact, my biggest regret is I don't have more. I didn't like capture it more. Yeah. I wish that I love those versions. They were all great. Like, I loved, we had so much fun at that time. And I've got all these different sections of my life. But to be honest, I don't have any of them that I don't appreciate and love. Like they were all very different, but love all of them. But ask me your original question.
No, so I know that you have lots of siblings. Are you one of 6 or 7?
Yeah, there's 7 kids in my family.
7 kids. And you're in the middle, is that correct?
No, I'm the 6th out of 7, so towards the end.
Wow. Yeah. So how was that growing up with all those? Because I have 2 siblings that are 14 and 16 years older than me, so I didn't really grow up with them. I grew up like an only child.
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, I always looked up to my siblings. It was cool. It gave me a lot of advantages. Like, a few of the things that I think make me uniquely good at what I get to do now. One of which was I was put in a lot of positions where I got to be around people that were much quote unquote cooler than me or higher up than me or whatever, further along than me because of my siblings. Mm-hmm. They'd bring their friends over and I was pretty ambitious kid. And so I would try to hang out with them and, to their credit, they let me a lot.
Yeah.
So a lot of my experience came from, and honestly, I think my confidence even came from, my brothers let me hang out with them and their friends and being able to do that. So I loved that. I loved having a bunch of people around. Like our house it was interesting because, there was a lot of different emotions going on in our home, but it was fun. Like, for the most part, it was always noisy. It was always a lot going on. Like I'm at a stage in my life now where I'm trying to go the opposite and just
into the quiet.
Calm and quiet in my life. Yeah. But growing up, I enjoyed it that way. Like it's for the most part, I say, I mean, look, there's no one right way to raise children. Right. And I think I give my parents a lot of credit because with 7 kids, I don't even know how they did it, but seems like they were always at everything. Like their way of showing love was spending time there. Which I think is, probably the highest compliment you can give another human that they physically show up for you in life. But they also were very loving and a lot of parties and gifts and things like that. We didn't have a lot of depth to our relationships. I think that's the part that I'm trying to create now as I get older. Like I really crave the depth with all my relationships. Mm-hmm. And in my family, it was, you didn't really talk about those things. Like shit would hit the fan and like nobody would really do anything. Like there was no talk about it later. It was just like act like it didn't happen kind of thing. And I think, so when you say how was it growing up, It was all the things. It was incredible. I had so much to learn, but also like, I think it really helped me learn how to get along with other people, because you're always managing these emotions in the house and everybody and these different energies that everybody brings to the table. And so I think it helped me a lot. Like, if nothing else, it really helped me a lot growing up with so many siblings around.
With the 7 siblings, were there any that you were naturally closer to, like the one below you, the one above you, were like, because there's gotta be such different age ranges that you naturally just niche into one or two. Was there that at all?
Yeah. So my brother Matt, he and I were closer for a little bit there. He was, I really looked up to him. Baseball was my life, and he was the star baseball player. He was the 2-time state MVP, the state champion. Like, so I really had like kind of an admiration for him. My oldest brother, Sam, was always a hard worker and everything, but we didn't really see him much. So it was harder. It was just our age gap was pretty big. We're closer now than ever probably. And then my sister, Mickey, we didn't really get along much growing up. We became really close 5 or 6 years ago, I would say. My brother JD and I were really close. My brother Dale and I were really close because we were like, a year and a half apart. So, and then my little sister, we fought a lot. But then I think when my family went through some tough times when I was like 18, her and I kind of like, rallied together. Yeah. But my brother Dale and I were definitely the closest, just because the age thing. And then we shared baseball cards. We shared a room, like my clothes became his. Honestly, he was one of the brothers that, like, he was a senior when I was a sophomore. And that was such an adventure, because his friends were like the tough kids in school, the cool kids, and he let me tag along for lunch every day and do all these things and just be around. I think it really was a big part of my confidence growing from a young age, and just having that support, even subconsciously, just knowing you have somebody there that has your back. Yeah. And so I was probably closest with him.
That's fantastic. Do you... You mentioned baseball. Were all of the Rex boys into baseball? Was that something that your dad was into, so you all followed that? Or was there a mixture of sports?
My dad kind of got into it as in human beings, we know that we're driven by the 6 human needs, right? Mm-hmm. Like Tony Robbins talks about this, and it really drives everything. We all have a different need structure, but that's certainty, variety, love or connection, significance, growth, and contribution. And that significance piece, my dad got a lot of significance out of my brother having the success he did, my brother Matt. And so I think he kind of leaned into trying to recreate that, not meaning to, it's just what it was for him, and so he really was pushing it on the other kids for sure. I think we all loved it though. My oldest brother, not so much. He played till he was like 15, until high school. But like, so to give you an example how much it meant to my family, my brother JD. So, and this is the dichotomy of my youth, dude. It's like everything was such a juxtaposition. But my dad could be so much fun and loved us so much, but at the same time, he could be such a disaster that he caused us a lot of problems. And so this is where, my brother Matt, he's the state MVP, but my dad just ran his mouth all the time in the stands and yelling at the coach, just bitching about the coach, and like loud, like people are hearing this. He did this my whole youth, and so my brother JD comes up to be on the high school team, and he was one of the better kids his age. He ended up playing college baseball, like a very successful college career at UVU. But the coach cut him. And 100% it was because he didn't want to deal with my dad, I'm pretty sure. I mean, my brother was the state MVP, and they cut his little brother, who was really good. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So my brother ends up going to Murray to play, but you have to be in the boundary. So my dad literally moves our entire family to Murray so that he can play baseball at Murray. So we moved when I was 12 for the sole reason that my brother could play baseball. And so that's how much it meant to the family. But also the whole reason he got cut was probably my dad in the first place. So it's just a complicated thing, right? And so anyway, my brother Dale, he ended up playing lacrosse. He was like state MVP in lacrosse. Yeah. They won the state championship. Pretty cool. But then for me, baseball was like a big driving force for me too.
Yeah. You have a beautiful story, and I'd love you to share it. You shared this in St. George with us about the baseball hat with the "You're not good enough" underneath that. Tell us that story, because that was really impactful for me.
Yeah, and so like I kind of pre-framed a lot of this situation. You kind of understand my family a little bit. So when I was 12, we moved to Murray, and I'd always been a borderline all-star in Taylorsville, which was the best team in the state. We were the best team out there. But like, so for example, when I was 10, I made the All-Star team, and we got to go to Iowa to play in this tournament. Well, when I was 11, I was on the All-Star team. And by the way, like, I don't know if I was one of the 15 best kids, but because of who my brother was, I was making the team kind of thing, you know. I was fine. I wasn't great. I know where I was and what I wasn't. But this was actually something that was like really messed with me a little bit. So when I was 11, we lost to another team. And I was at the water park one day. We had season passes to the water park. It was basically our babysitter was Raging Waters. You know, it was $55 a summer to drop us off every day. And one of the lifeguards, his little brother was on my team. He's like, "Why aren't you in New Orleans with the team?" I was like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Yeah, the whole team's in New Orleans. Why aren't you there?" And my parents never told me. But long story short, the coach called and said, "Hey, we've been invited to go play anyways because we were so good, even though we got beat in the state tournament." But my dad, I guess, told him no. I didn't even know. So I just like had this, like started feeling like I didn't fit in, like I wasn't good enough, all these things, you know? And that sucked for sure. I think it was a money issue as much as anything, but it felt like I just wasn't good enough, you know? Yeah. So when I was 12, we moved, and Murray wasn't quite as good as Taylorsville in baseball. And so I quickly became one of the best kids. But again, I didn't make the All-Star team, and I was one of the better players. But like, I think, who knows, like whatever. But my dad, this is again, like, part of the part where, you know, he really was trying the best he could. He's like, "Okay, well, I'm just going to start a whole second All-Star team." And he did. And so we had our own All-Star team. So there was like the first team, and then there was the second team. And so I was on the second team, obviously, and we ended up putting together a second All-Star team and ended up playing some games and had some fun with it. So anyway, when I was 13, I made the All-Star team. 14 years old, and this is a story I've actually told a few times. I'll tell this story because it has some huge significance in all this. And I didn't play very good that year. We went to the bigger field, and I was pretty small. I weighed 100 pounds, and I was slow, so I didn't play very good. And to be honest, I wasn't working hard enough. And so the year-end ceremony, it's like an amphitheater. It's called Ken Price Park, for those in Utah are familiar with it. But and the stands are like all the way up, and they have the year-end ceremony where they, you know, the winners of the league, the all-star teams. So all the parents are there, grandparents, like everybody's at this thing, hundreds of people. And I remember I'm sitting with like my 15 best friends. We're all sitting there together on like the third row. My parents are 10 rows behind us. Everybody else's parents, all my friends' parents, all my best friends are the baseball team, you know. And they start announcing the All-Star team, and they start, you know, you go down onto the field and get your hat, you get your trophy. And I remember watching, and I look, there's like 5 trophies and hats left, and there's like 6 of us. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like, oh shit, because I knew the other 5, they were all better than me. And one by one, Matt, they call them up onto the field, and I'm the last one sitting there by myself. Everyone got called but me. I'm sitting there by myself, and I didn't make it. And I knew that meant I wasn't going to hang out with my friends all summer. I wasn't good enough. All these things that like play into this, right? I just start crying. I'm like, I didn't know what to do. I just remember feeling so much shame because like I knew my parents were feeling, you know, bad for me, and all my buddies' parents were feeling bad for me. I'm literally just sitting there for like 20 minutes by myself. It was the worst.
And you're what, 14?
14. And so I remember though, dude, I don't know how or what gift I got. In that moment, I literally said, I will never feel like this again. And I knew I wasn't good enough. I had a self-awareness that no 14-year-old would have. I knew I wasn't good enough. I knew I didn't try hard enough. I didn't practice hard enough. And so I said, I'll never be outworked again. And that was the day I basically became an achiever, right? Like, but I knew, and I said, I just never want to feel this. But it was to this day probably the worst I've ever felt. And anyway, so come a couple months later, that gives a lot of context to my dad in this story because he was trying what was best for me, even though it wasn't what I wanted per se. But that gives a lot of context. So he had to see my pain. He saw how bad this hurt me, right? So before you become a freshman in high school, you can get held back a year if you want to. And my dad knew of some families that had done this, and their kids became like the state MVP because they were a year older, but they were already really good, you know? and so I think my dad wanted to help me. He thought, you know, maybe there was some significance at play for him. But anyway, he put all this pressure on me to get held back. He's like, hey, I'll buy you a truck. I'll pay for your college. I'll give you $1,000. He had my siblings talking to me. I mean, really put a lot of pressure on me to get held back. But I was one of the older kids. I was born in October. I had a great group of friends, the baseball players that I didn't get to hang out with that summer. To this day, if they bring up their trip to California that summer, it like triggers the shit out of me. Oh yeah. I'm like, shut the hell. Yeah, no, it really does. It's very painful. Like I should probably look at that. I have many times, but anyway, and he put all this pressure on me to get held back. But I didn't want to. And I had a crush on a girl my age. It was like my lifelong crush, like every reason not to get held back other than baseball. And he finally, I remember we were pulled up in our driveway, he was in the truck, and he looks at me and he goes, okay, like you need to make your decision. What are you going to do? I said, I don't want to get held back. I want to go forward. And he looks at me dead in the eyes and he just says, okay, well, just so you know again, you're not good enough. You'll never play baseball again. And all I heard was, you're not good enough, right? Mm-hmm. So I took that, wrote it on my hat for the next 3-4 years. It was under my brim of my hat every year, you're not good enough. And I was obsessed with this concept that I was going to prove him wrong. And I did. I ended up having a great high school career, ended up starting both my junior and senior year.
You didn't get held back, you just keep moving.
Yeah. And I ended up having a great career and everything. Yeah, it was awesome. Got invited to play college ball, but decided not to because I didn't enjoy it. But long story short, that was my driving force. So that compiled with sitting there as a 14-year-old feeling like couldn't hang out with my friends because I wasn't good enough. I just said, I'm going to have to prove that I'm the best at everything I do. And so from that day forward, I was always trying to prove that I was good enough, and it drove a lot of the decisions I made, the things I did. It made me a great realtor. I became the #1 realtor in the state. It made me a great missionary. I broke our mission baptism records. I could not have done that mission better than I did it. 2 years. I did not cheat myself for a minute. I'm not joking. I could not do anything that well again. Went all out, but I was just like needing to be the best to prove that I was lovable. It's why I teach this in the course now with We Are the They, because I understand it so deeply. Like when we have that wound and we're trying to prove that we're good enough, it's why the first thing we do, the first event people show up to is our badass list, because all these people have some kind of wound similar to mine. We all have something. We were picked last at recess, or a girl didn't like us back, whatever it is, right? And so we think to ourselves like, damn, and Tony Robbins even says this, our 2 biggest worries are that we're not lovable and we're not good enough. Everyone has the same 2 worries. Mm-hmm. And so the first exercise we do is have everybody say what makes them amazing. And what this does is people show up to these events, usually masterminds, and they're flexing, like talking about their cars or their girls or whatever, like what makes them cool. And what they're really saying, their little inner child is like, please like me. I promise I'm worth getting to know. I promise I'm worthy of your love. And they're just begging for it. And so by doing that exercise and just letting everybody tell everyone why they're amazing, we all connect and nobody fronts. And that's the beauty of We Are the Day. There's nobody flexing in We Are the Day. Nobody. No. You look like a weirdo.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. It's because we set that container from the first night. Yeah. That's what creates that magic.
And there are people in We Are the Day that are entitled to have big egos.
Oh,
you've got multi-millionaires, restaurant owners, guys with international
But in that room,
companies.
You just know nobody's going to be impressed by it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's absolutely.
But that's where I came up with that, because it was my own life. I mean, and where, it had positives. Like I said, it drove me to be the best realtor. It drove me to, try to make a great life, throw the best parties, have the most girlfriends or the hottest girlfriends or all these different things. And, but it also screwed me up. I mean, no matter what I did, it never felt like I was enough. I was always trying to prove myself instead of just accepting that I was worthy to be there. And so I have a lot of empathy for people in that situation, because that was me.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that you were trying to prove it to yourself, or were you subconsciously trying to prove it to your dad, even years down the road?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's both, right? Like, I think it goes hand in hand.
Yeah. What about your mom? Was she into the sports as well, or what was her dynamic in the family?
Yeah, and it's so complicated, dude, because you put yourself in their shoes. You're 7 kids. I don't know how they gave us the attention they did. I felt like my parents never missed an important event. I'll start with that. There was a lot of love, like I said, but again, so my dad, 95% of the time was amazing, but that 5% could be pretty ugly, Yeah. And the hard part was my mom and dad didn't really have a very good marriage. Okay. I had a chance to talk to my dad about this last year, and they just were never really in love. They got married for church obligation. They felt like he baptized her and he wanted her to. And then, my mom felt like she just needed to, she was in love with someone else, but decided to marry my dad. She told me this because she felt like she needed to have kids with him, which obviously she did. Mm-hmm.
7 of them.
I wouldn't be alive,
Yeah.
But it's interesting though, because of that, there was this weird energy always in the house. There just no affection for each other. And so my parents had I would call it a horrible marriage, honestly. Like they masked it really well, like publicly with the church and stuff, which is even worse because then your concept of love and God is connected to this weird non-affectionate love. And so my mom tried her best, and it wasn't that she wasn't there, but anytime something would happen with my dad, she was just in her own survival mode. So she wasn't able to really take care of us. So my dad would blow up, for example, and, whatever, maybe hit one of us or maybe just yell or maybe just embarrass us in public or something. And I mean, what a little kid needs at that point is the mom to come up and like, how you doing? Let's talk about it. Are you doing okay? And I can't remember one time her ever even acknowledging any of the chaos. So for her, she was an avoidant, right? And so unfortunately, for me, like growing up, I always felt loved. Like I always felt like loved by my mom and my dad. But I also have this, I think for me, it's really hard to trust the feminine because it never really took care of me. And I think that's driven a lot of my behaviors in my dating life and things like that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
You mentioned obviously being on your mission, the family were LDS. You're no longer part of the church. How did that play in with the family, with your parents, with your siblings? Are a lot of them still in or a lot of them out? What's the dynamic?
Yeah, so when I was all in on the church, you have to understand too, Matt, like for me, it wasn't a social thing. I was 100% in. I mean, I was a virgin into my 30s. I didn't have my first drip of alcohol until I was 2 years out of the mission or out of the church. Like I really did the thing. To me, it was everything until it was really nothing for me. But it was interesting because when I was all in, I really thought a lot about it. And what happened for me, well, I'll kind of just tell you what happened and then kind of how I handled it with my family. When I was all in, I remembered feeling bad when people left. You worry about them. You think that they are lost. You think that they're, just confused or like they're just on the wrong path or they failed a temptation and all these different things. And so you really worry a lot about them. And a lot of times, to be honest, like when people leave the church, especially back then, I think it's a little bit different now. I think we've been a part of that change. But I think what would happen is people, all of a sudden, they had like this really good base of morality, like for better or worse, it did give you a lot of structure. And you take that away and they just go off the deep end. Like they try everything. A lot of them become swingers or they start partying their asses off. And it kind of just validates to all the church members that that's what happens when you leave the church, right?
Yeah.
And so I had this idea. So, well, for me, it was like, I was just doing the church thing, but I kept having these feelings that it was off, that it wasn't right. This isn't the way God would do it. And so without going into everything, I decided to study for 2 years. I was like, Jimmy, everything else in your life, I was an avid reader, would read 50 to 100 books a year at that time. And I said, everything else you would study the hell out of this to figure it out, but you haven't done that with the church. So just do it. And I did it with the eyes of wanting to prove it to myself to stay in. But I decided for the first time, the church is very against reading material that's not pro-church, obviously, right?
Of course.
And as I started doing it, and I dug deeper and deeper, it became very apparent to me that this wasn't what I thought it was. And it got to the point where as sure as I was that it was true, I was that sure that it wasn't. And I didn't know what to do with that for a while, but I knew I didn't want anybody. And by the way, I didn't tell anybody I was doing this. I was still going to church during those 2 years. At that time, I made a decision that I was going to leave because the truth is like, for me, it was as simple. And by the way, I was really happy in the church. It wasn't like this thing that, looking back, I don't know if I was as happy as I thought I was, but it wasn't. I had a good life. Like I was happy with my life still. I wasn't aware of how much some of these things were playing a part in my own unhappiness. My biggest issue that I had is I felt broken because you have this standard you're supposed to live up to, and it's an impossible standard, especially for a kid in his younger or later 20s. It's not possible to do what they're asking you to do. And you always are feeling shame and guilt for not living up to it. And so, I was a virgin, but I had guilt because I wanted to have sex with girls. Like that alone was causing me shame for myself. Like, why can't I overcome these feelings when really they're just physiological feelings that anybody would get?
Yeah.
So anyways, long story short, I decided, I said, I'm going to wait 2 more years to tell anyone I left. So I was out. I decided that day I was out and started just doing my thing. But after 2 years, I slowly started letting people know. My sister was actually the first one to ask me. She's like, you seem so happy. Like, what are you doing? And I said, I haven't told anyone. A couple of years ago, I left the church. And it was like mind blown, you know. My whole family was still in at that time. I'll say this though, like, so then I started kind of coming out a little bit more and letting people know. My family kind of knew over the next few years. And if I'm being honest, they couldn't have been better about it. I don't think they saw, like, I did a couple of things I think helped. Like, my life was going in a good direction. It was going really well. I was doing a lot of service. I was always stepping up as a son, as an uncle, as a brother, all these things. But there also was, it started what became a little bit of a disconnect. You just, little by little, you quit. You're not on the same team anymore. And so certain things just don't hit the same way. And I will say my family couldn't have been better about it until about 5-6 years ago, when I discovered plant medicine. Mm-hmm. And the truth is like, it just changed everything for me. It really did. And it was a game changer. But in that, I didn't know how to express it. And because my family never talked about things, I mean, this is a really crazy thing, Matt. Like, you're raised in this church and they're told it's everything, right? Like, it's the only plan of happiness. This is the way to heaven. This is God's plan. And then you tell them you're out and nobody asks you about it. Nobody wants to talk about it. They don't want to acknowledge it. And I think I just felt like somebody asked me about this.
Somebody, like, not putting power
somebody loved
into
me
it.
enough to care to ask me about this, right? And meanwhile, my friends and I are having these deep, connected conversations. We're all relating. And it was like a very safe place for me between my coaches and my friends. Like, we could talk about anything and it was just full love and acceptance. And I felt like I was seen by them. Meanwhile, my family, they were still loving me on the surface like they had my whole life, but nobody wanted to talk about it. There was no depth to it. Nobody ever said, hey man, can we sit down? I'm just very curious what your experience is. And I didn't ask them either. Their lives, like, it just wasn't what we did in my family. I'm not blaming them, but at the same time, I think I was screaming inside to be understood. And so I made a few inappropriate comments about plant medicine. One was at my niece's birthday party, just a joke about mushrooms. It was a throwaway joke, but I also had been preaching that this thing's sacred. And then I made light of it in front of my nieces and nephews who look up to me a lot. And that was the day, I think, and then the first time they saw me drinking openly, we did a family cruise, and one brother was really upset that I was drinking openly, but I just wanted to, like, people to talk to me about it. I wanted somebody to ask me about these things, and nobody did. And so, yeah, I made mistakes. I would say at that point, a few of my family members definitely switched. But here's the theory I have in life, Matt. And it's, if you remember this, everything else makes sense. We as humans will do whatever we need to feel safe, period. Everybody. So for my siblings, the ones that were all in on the church, they're raising their kids. They're doing the best they can. They're working their asses off to make it happen. Their kids are great. And here comes this uncle, right, who's crazy, who just has a big life and does a lot of crazy things. And they look up to him. Your kids do. And all of a sudden he's talking about doing mushrooms, which might as well be heroin to those kids. Yeah. And I scared the shit out of them. And I can see that now. I have enough empathy for them to go, oh, yeah, I didn't do that right. And so they had to, at that point, push me away more. Mm-hmm. They didn't push me away when I left the church, but I also didn't talk about it. I was very much, I would have individually if they asked, but I wasn't the guy posting on Facebook or criticizing the church. I had a few tweets where I was upset at BYU for ways they handled, like, the gay situation and things like that. I was like, wish that could be better. But then I said, I'm just going to do this my own way. I'm going to talk about it on my podcast, but, like, in a way that creates safety for other people. Because one of my proudest things about We're the They is we have a third of the group is Mormon. Yeah. And they feel so safe with me and with this group because I did learn some things, right? And I learned how to talk about this in a way where I can honor myself. One of my brothers, he's like, when he was criticizing me, he's like, you talked about the church like it's this, like you don't have any problems with it, but I know damn well that you have huge problems with it. And I go, dude, I have massive problems with it. That's why I freaking left. Mm-hmm. Like, I do have huge problems with it. And I'm trying not to. Yeah. Like, I'm trying not to have issues with it. Yeah. So I am posting and I am talking about it in a way that I'm trying to honor it. I'm trying to honor my family and my friends that are in it. But yeah, I've got huge damn issues with it. It screwed up a lot of pieces of my life. Yeah. I didn't sign up for it. I was born into it. And so the truth is like, I had to figure out ways to talk about that, that made it safe for other people. So I don't blame my siblings that have a problem with me now. Honestly, like, I get it. I actually do. And I even had like this, there's, to remove all expectations from others is a really good place to get to because you no longer have pain. So like I have, one sibling, I was very close with him and his kids. And And frankly, he's the one that has removed himself the most, but I also made him feel the least safe and said things that I shouldn't have said and everything else. And I had this realization a couple of months ago. I'm like, maybe he's right. Like, his kids are honestly amazing. I'm like, maybe they are better off without me in their life. I think most people are better off with me in their life. Mm-hmm. I like who I am. I wake up every day happy to live as Jimmy Rex and to do my life. But I also have to not be naive to the thought, like, his kids are great and he's raising them great. And I am a giant question mark. I'm a giant freaking kink in the spokes, dude. Yeah. Like, one of his kids misinterprets one of my messages the wrong way and sends him down the wrong path. Yeah. I don't know if I'd be able to forgive myself. Right. And so, like, I had this realization, like, shit, maybe they are better off without me. And I have to be okay with that. Mm-hmm. I think that's the reality of, like, life's just a messy thing. And, you know, it's why you find your people and find the people you like being around, find the people that like you being around, and you spend the time there. And all I do is energetically send love to his family otherwise. And, you know, those siblings I'm not as close to now. But they're just the reality of when you have that many people in your family. I mean, we have 7 kids. All of them are married but me. All of them have at least 3 kids but me. So you're talking about 40 people, basically. Yeah. You're just going to have a lot of disagreements. But so to answer your question, that was kind of a long answer, but that's kind of the dynamic of my family. But I wanted to tell the full story because I actually get it. Like, I really do understand why they can't have me in their lives at a better level.
Yeah. I love that. And you and I have talked about that in the past and whatnot with some of the things that have gone on because of you doing plant medicine. You've openly shared that in your podcast too about some of the struggles. But you mentioned the tribe of people you have around you. One of the things I want to highlight for the listeners of my show is you are one of the most connected people I think I've ever met and ever known. And you have such deep friendships, which have lasted for decades. Like, there's people in our leadership group, Dr. Nick Howland and Jake Waldron, they were high school buddies of yours.
Elementary,
sorry, yeah. You know, for people out there that are struggling to make friends, and in the world and the society we in, you know, with social media, everything seems to not be as in person. It's all very indirect. You've got these guys that have been friends with you for like a long time. What are some of the things that you guys do to stay such great connected friends?
Yeah, no, and I talk a lot about this in my new book, B1, comes out April 2nd. So you guys should go grab a copy. But I have a whole chapter on friends. And it's funny because when I started, you know, I had a lot of mentors and coaches trying to push me to, like, Jimmy, you need to do a coaching program. You need to do this. And I felt like an imposter, Matt. I'm like, there's people in much better shape than me. I'm not even married. Like, I'm the single guy. I can't figure that piece out. Like, I have my problems. Okay. I'm very aware. And I was like, who am I going to coach these other people? But then it came to me that it was supposed to be a group to help men connect and become friends. And I went, oh shit, I'm better than anybody at that. I know exactly how to do that. Like, I literally knew the formula to help friends create deep, lasting friendship. And I truly believe I have as many real deep friendships as any human alive, seriously, at the expense of having it with my family and with, you know, a wife or something like that. Cause I've always chosen, you know, these friendships, but I love them so much. And so I'm like, I know how to do this. So there's a couple things that people, by the way, it's why the program works so well. I got a text from a guy, did a message from him. One of the guys in group 4, we just got back from our second event this last weekend. He said, dude, I said, when I saw Brandon, and he named a few guys that joined group 1, he's like, when I saw them joining the group, they kept talking about how deep their friends were with this group. And I'm like, what are they talking about? How they've only known each other for 6 months. How would they even, you know each other that well? He's like, bro, I get it. He's like, that it's magical how you do this. Like, I feel like these are my best friends and we've only known each other for 6 months. I just want to tell you, man, like, keep going. It was such a beautiful message. And there's a couple things. Number one is when we feel seen by other people, like they truly see us for everything, we don't have our guard up, we're not wearing a mask, and then we feel loved and accepted in that state, that immediately becomes a bond stronger than you have with probably most people in your life, if not everybody in your life. Mm-hmm. So we do some very specific things early on in the program to be seen for all that we are and all that we're not. But I do it in a way that's safe. It's not safe to get up in front of the room and just, get drilled on everything you've ever done wrong. But I do that circle exercise, for example, right?
Powerful.
And it's very safe to just take 2 steps in when the whole room's doing it. But you're being seen. Mm-hmm. And you're being accepted. Then I give everybody a chance to share, and you can go as deep as you want to go or whatever else. And you feel truly accepted in that room. There is no judgment by anybody. Every one of us is just like, oh my gosh, man, we're all just trying to walk each other home. And so by building that foundation, like, but with our friends, we do the same thing. Like, we're just open. Like, I've had friends admit things to me that, just some of the craziest shit you've ever heard in your life. And you just love them in that state. You're like, man, you're innocent. You didn't know any better. Like, or, it happened to you, not because of who you are. Or, I've had friends confess things to me that they thought they were the worst human in the world. And I'm freaking laughing because I'm like, bro, you're the hero of the story and you don't even know it.
Yeah.
You think you're the villain. I'm like, dude, I can't believe how you showed up in that moment under those circumstances. So I think making it safe for people to feel seen is the first thing. Mm-hmm. And then the second one is, our mind is interesting. It only remembers the extraordinary moments when you start thinking back. It doesn't remember the mundane things. So it'll remember very vividly big experiences that you have. And so how many of you had in your 2 years with We Are Today, year and a half, you've probably had no less than 100 hugely emotionally charged experiences.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so that's designed because you feel like you've lived 2 lifetimes with these guys in less than 2 years. Mm-hmm. And so that's part of the reason why me and my friends, we always do big things together. We have these big experiences. It's not big like we have to go to the Super Bowl. It's just like we're doing things that cause a lot of emotion to come out. And we're able to talk about things like interventions with our friends, or sitting down just having a real talk and talking about not feeling good enough, maybe one of my friends, or needing to be picked up, or being suicidal or depressed. Like, we're able to go to those places, and those emotional moments create such a strong bond that you just have a very deep connected friendship, and you can trust those friendships.
Yeah, I agree. You've done such an amazing job with We Are the They, and like you said, that first weekend in Moab, the circle exercise that you did, one of the most powerful exercises I think I've ever done, and probably will ever do. And to explain to people, like, you have 50 men in a room in one house, all in a circle. You're in the middle, and you're just asking questions. And like you said, people are taking 2 steps in if that applies to them, 2 steps out. And at this point, we didn't know a lot of each other's stories. Mm-hmm. We're just names and figures. And so when you start to recognize people stepping into some of the questions, like, have you made 6 figures, lost 6 figures, attempted suicide, thought about suicide, like lost children, had cancer. These people are just stepping in and out. And it's not until you start to have conversations later, it's like, okay, well, this is the guy that stepped in on this question. He also just happens to be this guy. Mm-hmm. You're like, holy shit, I'd never put 2 and 2 together. And that's the beauty of it. Like you said, like, I have now the strongest friendships I've ever had in my life, nearly 40 years, and I've never had friendships as strong as I have. And that's from going through school, 10 years in the military, moving to America. Never had a friendship like I have now, with dozens of guys that I would never assume would come into my life. Mm-hmm. Meeting a restaurateur that owns multiple restaurants and is as flamboyant as you would like. I never thought I'd be great friends with an individual like that, because our worlds would never mesh together, but they have. And so you're phenomenally correct. The way that you bring those friendships about, it's amazing. And to watch you with your lifetime friends and long friends like Nick Howland, Jake Waldron, Travis Prince, like the way that you connect and do things together, it's just beautiful. It's just amazing. So,
well, we're, there's this gift in life. It's like, find out, what do you do the best in the world at? Or like, what are you most qualified to do? Well, you're most qualified to help the person you once were, or like, what can I help other people? Like, when I go back 20 years, who did I need? Like, these are questions I like to ask, and then try to lean into that. And then, because you can help so many other people. And that's the gift of my life, is to know that you guys are all building these friendships, where, like, how fun it is to, like, see everybody doing life together. And that all has, woven into the fabric of every one of those friendships is me. And all of the lessons I had to learn to do this, and the pain I had to go through, and the struggle I had to go through, and the doubts and the fears all went into this, but I pushed through all that and did this anyways. And now the gift is that I'm forever woven into all these beautiful friendships and relationships. I mean, think about it. Every group has 50 guys, and there's 50 relationships. That's 2,500 relationships per group. I mean, there's literally over 10,000 relationships that have formed that are real, all because I decided to have this crazy idea and give a lot of purpose to my own struggle and pain and journey that I went on.
Yeah. You obviously were at a certain point in your life before you started We Are the They, where you knew you could take this on. Like, you stepped out of the world of real estate. That is a huge leap, to step out of real estate production completely and managing a team and just go off left field and start something new is bold. It's ballsy, in fact. So you were at a certain place in your life where you knew you could do this. What have you learnt from We Are the They? Because obviously we've learned all different things, and you're on your fourth leadership group, so you see the same stories and same things. But what's something that you've learned in the last 2.5 years of starting We Are the They that has really hit you that you didn't expect to learn?
You know, something I didn't expect. I thought as everybody got into the work and started doing it, and they built the friendships and they had the camaraderie and the support and the accountability and everything else, I thought their lives would all get much easier, and they don't. You just become much better at being able to handle it as an individual. But the trials and the challenges never quit coming for anybody. And that's been the part that I think originally was the hardest for me. I had guys going through some really hard stuff, and I was like, oh, like, how come this is still happening? And then I started realizing, like, it's life. Mm-hmm. Life is never going to quit happening. But what's been cool, I had a situation just this last weekend that was pretty big. And one of the guys from group one was, in the middle of it. And he hit me up afterwards. I just checked in on him the day after. I was coaching him through some stuff. And the next day I called him just to check in, see how he's doing. He said, I got to say, man, 2 years ago, this would have ruined me. This would have wrecked my life. I wouldn't have been able to help anybody in this situation. I would have been a mess. He said, I feel good, man. I am good. I was with some of the guys from the group last night. I feel supported. I feel like I'm going to be fine. And he's good. And I think that's what I've learned the most is like, oh, the challenges and trials, because that's the gift of life is like, no matter what level we get to, David Dita talks about this in The Way of the Superior Man. Like the mistake that men make is to think it's supposed to get easier. Mm-hmm. This thing's never going to get easier. And go back to what I said at the beginning, the 6 human needs. Well, one of them is growth. And guess what? If you want to grow, it comes with pain and struggle. Amen. And, I've had this thing I heard on Joe Rogan. He said, if you were God, let's just, for example, okay, and you could do whatever you wanted, everything went your way, you could, whatever, have every experience this life ever could offer. How many years would have to go by before you were so damn bored with everything working out that you would want everything to be complete and random and chaos? It wouldn't take that long, maybe a couple of years. And that's the world that we get to live in. So even God himself, if he could come and design a perfect world, it would be the one we're in, where you have these problems and you have these struggles, because that's what makes it fun and interesting. Mm-hmm. If you ever, I remember when I bought the Nintendo when I was little and we played this one game and it was so hard to win, but then we got this thing called the Game Genie and it would cheat and you could just keep going forever. It kind of ruined it. It took away a lot of the enjoyment of winning because you just kept going. Like, you're invisible. And so it's just like, anyway, so my point of that is like, the goal is not to, make this life quit having issues or problems. It's just to be able to handle those differently and better. I think that's been the biggest thing I've learned.
Yeah. So my eldest daughter, Lily, she knew I was coming down today to podcast with you. So she actually asked a question. She wanted to know what your biggest fear is.
Ooh. It's funny. I mean, I don't have one that actively like just pops up, but as I think about it, I think my biggest fear, we can edit this. It's taking me a minute here to figure this out. I think my biggest fear still is probably maybe one day waking up and feeling like I should have done my life differently. I don't feel that way now. Like I've had all these validating moments, but maybe like if I don't keep doing what I'm supposed to, or I don't stay on, that I'll look back in maybe 10 or 20 years and wish that I'd done some things differently. I think I constantly am, it's funny. Well, and I'll just kind of, I had this experience. It was in one of my ayahuasca ceremonies, and I had this chance to talk to my higher self, and not to get woo-woo on everybody, but this is what was happening. And I asked her, I said, hey, I don't want to be 50 and be alone and miserable. And my higher self looked at me kind of funny. I was like, well, you wouldn't be. You'd be whatever you decide to be. And up till that moment in this conversation, this definitely was my biggest fear, was being alone and miserable someday. And I said, well, what do you mean? And it was like, well, you never thought you'd have been 40 and single. Are you miserable? And I was like, no. Right, because you're choosing not to be. Same thing at 50. There's no reason you would be miserable unless you just decide to be miserable. Just keep doing the things that that bring you fulfillment. And that day, up till that point, my fear was definitely being like older and alone and stuff like that. But I'm not anymore. And so that's why I have to think harder on this question. But I think just maybe looking back and like wasting, we only got one life, and I have a little bit of fear of You know, I still fear missing out on maybe, I mean, in life you can do anything, but you can't do everything. Every path you take, there's a positive to it, but there's also a sacrifice. And so I think just making the best decisions and keep doing the best that you can would be my biggest
I
friend.
love that. There you go, Lily. So Jimmy, that's the Jimmy's answer for you. As we start to wrap up, I know it's easy for us to say if there's people out there that are feeling the way that you've felt in the past, like feeling alone or worthlessness and whatnot, which is what I've gone through too. It's easy to direct people and say, well, they should join We Are the They because it's changed so many lives. But for those out there that aren't ready to take that leap yet, what's some things that people can do that you've done in the past that are struggling with that worthlessness, a little bit of alone, not being good enough? Like, what's maybe 2 or 3 little habits that they can just do in their daily life to start to shift that mental change?
Yeah. And again, like if you have great people in your life and support, then, I think whatever you want in life, you got to give it away. And so if you want more love, go be more loving. If you want more friendship, go be a good friend, if you want to really expedite that, I think I've created the perfect formula for that.
Amen.
It has accountability. It has community. It has like skills and knowledge that you pick up, and it has a built-in frame to just force you to do it. All you have to do is show up. The rest takes care of itself. But ultimately, you can do it without my program. But whatever you want more of, give it away. So go put yourself out there. Take chances. The gift of my life was that when I was younger, dude, I just had no fear of like going for it. So I would start these businesses, and I did a TV show, and I started doing stand-up comedy. I went on a mission to Mexico and didn't even speak Spanish. Like, I just did all these things that most people would be terrified of, and it was all just fun to me. And I never thought that failing to me was never it not working. This is something, Matt, that I've just always had, and I think it's a superpower that I just was gifted with or whatever. But to me, the failure was if I thought I should do it and I didn't. And so I never worried if it worked. I do shit all the time that doesn't work. When I went to college, I had a game I would play. I remember there was this beautiful girl sitting there, and I didn't go talk to her. And I beat myself up for like days on this. And then I kind of played it logically, like, Jimmy, if you would have gone up and she would have said no, you're the exact same outcome as you ended up with because you didn't do shit. I said, I'm never going to do that again. So I made a game. I had 3 seconds when I was in college. If I saw a pretty girl, I had to go talk to her. Had to. And I'm not shitting you. I probably did it the next couple thousand times the opportunity presented itself. And guess what? The first times I would go do it, maybe half would give me their number or a third, By the end, they all would because I knew what to say and I knew how to say it and everything else. But ultimately what happened was it just wasn't personal. Like we think that everything's personal to us, and it keeps us from cold calling if you're a realtor. Mm-hmm. It keeps you from asking out a pretty girl if you're a guy. It keeps you from, having a tough conversation with your kid, maybe if you're not sure how they feel about something. And it's like ultimately, to me, the failure is in not doing it. And when you can wrap your head around that, it's pretty empowering because you just go for it and then you don't have any regrets.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I absolutely love that. Well, Jimmy, we've been an hour. I absolutely love it. Thank you so much for coming on. You mentioned your book, B1. When's that coming out?
April 2nd.
Okay, so guys, this I know from Jimmy, from everything he's mentioned, all the things he said today, this book is going to be a very, very, very powerful book. So get online, order it, pre-order it. I think I've already got like 6 copies coming because I'm giving them out to friends of mine as well.
Beautiful.
Thank you for the leap of faith that you took on yourself, for starting We Are the They. It has forever impacted my life, given me the greatest friendships I've dreamed of, has actually given friendships to myself and Andrea that we as a couple have always looked for. We've always wanted family friends married friends who have kids that we can just be completely vulnerable with. And we found that through We Are the They. So without you, I wouldn't have changed my life. I know there's hundreds of other men in the group that would say exactly the same thing if they had the opportunity to sit here. So thank you for taking a leap of faith on yourself, for putting what you've put together for We Are the They, for the tireless amounts of hours and time that you put into the program to make it as successful. It shows from the way that guys have changed their lives and the things we're doing. So thank you for taking that leap of faith on yourself. And
thank you, brother. It means the world, and that's everything I was hoping it was going to be and do. So thank you. You're a walking billboard for the reason why I made the good choice. So love you, man.
I love you too. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Bear Den podcast. Please click subscribe and get the updates for our new episodes. And if you feel the need to reach out, you can reach me on Instagram @TheBritBear.